Hello and welcome. I am Ray Ferrara, CFP, your host of the Up Your Assets podcast. You can find all of our podcasts at upyourassets.org, along with additional financial information. We recently did a podcast on estate planning after the One Big Beautiful Bill. But one of the things we did not discuss was about legacy planning. Some people feel that they want to rule from the grave and may set up complicated trusts, while others are willing to give the money outright to their heirs. Sometimes it is a combination of the two. Neither of the two extremes are right or wrong. It's a personal choice. Deciding whether to use a professional trust company, often referred to as a corporate trustee, or a friend or family member is one of the most significant choices in estate planning. While an individual might know your family better, a trust company offers a level of permanence and professional rigor that an individual cannot match. So, to help us today in understanding the ins and the outs of a trust company, we've invited Jim Combs Jr. Jim recently celebrated his 12th anniversary as president and CEO of National Advisors Holding, Inc., and its subsidiaries on April 1st, 2025. He's a director and member of the Governance Committee of National Advisors Holdings, Inc., and serves as the chairman of the board of directors for National Advisors Trust Company and National Advisors Trust of South Dakota, Inc. Jim, welcome to the Up Your Assets podcast.
Hello, Ray. Thanks for having me today.
It's great to have you. Now, we believe in full disclosure, so I had the good fortune to be on the founding board of directors of National Advisors Trust and have been a stockholder since the beginning, almost 25 years ago. Currently, I own about 1.5% of the outstanding shares. Well, Jim, why don't you take just a few moments and give everybody a good look at your background?
Thank you, Ray, and thanks again for being such a loyal client and friend of the company. Yeah, so after resigning my commission in the Army, I set about my second career and entered into the financial services industry, starting with Bankers Trust Company in New York. But at that time, I was on the Treasury Services side of the business. And it wasn't until I changed jobs and went to work at Wachovia in North Carolina, which is now Wells Fargo. That was my entry into the trust and wealth management industry, where I ultimately was the head of trust and custody operations there, and then went on to the provider side of the business, where I became the solutions manager for SEI. SEI is a major provider of investment and wealth management software and services in the country. And while I was there, I was head of private banking and trust solutions, where we supported over 300 banks of various sizes and 8 of the top 10 national banks in the country. So it was a great place to broaden my perspectives and get deeper domain expertise in the industry. I then took my talents to Wilmington Trust Company, where I was head of trust and custody operations there until just after the merger and integration with M&T Bank. And then I went back to SEI and was the chief operating officer for their investment manager unit. And that unit was focused on fund administration for 40 Act and mutual and hedge funds, as well as investment manager outsourcing. And that took me all the way up to joining National Advisors, as you mentioned earlier, in April of 2013.
Well, first of all, thank you for your service. And second, I'm talking about the military service, of course, but I also want to thank you for your service with National Advisors Trust. Tell us a little bit of the story about National Advisors Trust, who you are, what you do, and what makes you unique.
Absolutely. I love talking about the company. And as you well know, as a founding member, it all started with a vision by a handful of people like you, Ray, who not only put their talents and their treasure to work, but has guided the company since its inception. And I do think that makes us different in that we were formed by advisors for advisors. And that gets translated into our purpose and our mission as a company today, because we're one of the unique situations where we're aligned with you and the families you serve. And we're there to help you grow and fulfill your duties. But there's other ways, we really are one of America's most advisor-friendly trust companies. We administer roughly $8 billion of assets and have 340 advisory firms that we support across 5 different channels, whether it be registered investment advisors, which is most of our relationships, but we have banks, credit unions, CPA firms, and a handful of family offices and law firms as well. So we are a full service trust company. And what's unique, and I thought one of the things that attracted me to National Advisors, was that the founders decided to only operate in a directed trustee model, which is somewhat unique and something that it's the only model we've ever operated, but it's relatively new to a lot of other providers. So that makes us probably one of the firms that has the most deep domain expertise in doing that for clients.
Jim, when you say a directed relationship, what does that mean to the layperson that's out there, and
That,
what makes that important to your client, the end client, the person who's the beneficiary of those trusts?
yeah, and that's where I'm glad you started there because there is a difference. So the traditional model that most people are probably familiar with, offered by traditional banks and trust companies, is a delegated model. And it's a bundled solution where they provide all the services related to a trust administration, custody, investment management, and other specialty services. We're different in that the directed model is unbundled, and it starts with the advisor who is responsible for the family relationship and manages the money, provides investment advice, and manages the assets. And we're singly focused on our piece, which is the trust administration. And why that's important, Ray, is I think it's the best model out there because it provides full transparency to the family about all the providers, all their fees. It gives them flexibility for picking the specialists they want, not necessarily someone picked on their behalf and thrust upon them. And more importantly, the delegated model is oftentimes filled with proprietary product and hidden fees. And in a directed model, there's more transparency on fees and people can appreciate the value of all the services that are being provided on their behalf.
So, in your case, then, when somebody, let's say, passes away and the trust is created on behalf of the children and the other beneficiaries are going to know that the same advisors that helped to create the wealth for their parents are going to be the ones that are going to be able to help invest the money and direct the investment of that money for the next generation as well.
That's exactly one of the benefits. That continuity, as you can imagine, is so important, especially with time of tragedy and someone passes away. So that is
And
definitely one of the benefits, and the family's in control, which is very important as a fiduciary.
And while we've never had it happen, and I hope it never does, I think one of the unique things that's in the directed model versus the traditional model is the fact that if I, as the investment advisor, was not performing well, they can fire me and keep you and bring in another advisor to help manage the assets as long as they're willing to work with you as the corporate trustee.
That's exactly right. That's the power of that model.
So we just talked about the beneficiaries. Now let's talk about the advisors. How should they view trusts for their clients and businesses and then make them a part of their clients' estate plans? What's the importance of all of that?
Yeah, thanks. So obviously, for most advisors today are planning centric, and what follows the financial plan is typically the estate plan, and we're a natural extension of that. And so for advisors in their practices, obviously this enables them to provide more holistic advice to the family and be more of a trusted advisor for them across their whole financial picture. It also really enables them to reach out and build relationships with future generations through the trust vehicle. Today, obviously, most advisory firms can grow enterprise value by having larger amounts of assets under administration, and trust accounts are typically 3 to 5 times larger than an investment agency account, and they tend to have longer lives. They're stickier. They tend to be 13 to 30 years in duration before they're passed on to the next generation. And all this, accrues to the benefit of the family and then the advisory firm in terms of that continuity of service and the enterprise value that comes out of it.
Well, Jim, let's talk about the assets. When you talk about the $8 billion plus of assets that you have under administration, pretty easy to think in terms of a home that might be in a trust, a vacation home. Easy to think about bank relationships that you have to accumulate, investment accounts that are being managed, et cetera. How do you deal with those non-traditional assets like real estate or operating businesses, collectibles, or, in this world today, crypto.
Yeah, yeah, and the digital assets are a big part of it today in today's society. You're right, Ray. So we are unique in that as a full service trust company, we custody and service the unique assets. And other examples would be gas, oil, mineral interests, commercial and retail properties. The whole range, all the way through. The physical assets and collectibles, as you said. And so obviously that's a competency of ours and enables all the assets to be safe kept and custodied and reported through us and through the advisor. And that is different than some firms just strictly administer accounts with marketable securities, and they have to go somewhere else for the unique asset servicing. So
Yeah,
we have some integration with some partners who actually have even more specialty practices in the accounting and services the assets, because that actually is something the advisor can benefit from in the directed trustee model.
Well, I know over my 50 some years in the financial business, and certainly all of the vast background that you have, it's amazing the number of types of assets that clients can collect along the way. So it's good to know that you can wrap all of those under one umbrella and make it easier for the beneficiaries.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Ours range from, a collection of antique violin bows, platinum bars, to, like you said, vacation homes and oil and gas and mineral interests.
Yeah. So in the beginning, I talked about that some people really want to rule from the grave and have very complicated estates, and some just say, "Oh, to heck with it," and give it to the kids, the grandkids, and if they blow it, they blow it. But when it comes to a trust, talk about the advantages of using a trust company versus a family member or a trusted friend of the family.
That's a great question, Ray. And it's one of the biggest decisions. And oftentimes we're involved with the advisor to make sure that the families are educated and they know the options and the pros and cons of each. So I'll just give a quick recap. So you mentioned earlier some obvious benefits of the corporate trustee. When you're considering a family member or a trusted friend, there's first the amount of work that's required to administer a trust effectively. Second would be the risk. There's a lot of personal risk that a fiduciary assumes, which then comes with, the need to pay for insurance and other things. And then as a function of those two is, do you have the right tools and expertise to fulfill those duties? So when you look at all those factors, it quickly tilts towards hiring a professional who's independent and objective, who's got all the expertise to interpret the administrative aspects of a trust instrument, which are so critical to preserving the assets and preserving the legacy that the grantor.
Let's say that you are selected as the corporate trustee. What role can the beneficiary play, or do they play in working and talking to the trust officer? Anybody else there to just kind of look over your shoulder and my shoulder on behalf of the beneficiaries at all?
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, wealthy families have a number of providers who are specialists. It could be a tax preparer, it could be the CPA for the family, or in a lot of cases, the families are small business owners. There could be an estate planning attorney that's involved. And that's why I think the directed model is the best model. And most of the advisors we work with, like yours, Ray, your firm, the advisor is essentially the quarterback who brings together all those different specialties and harmonizes their activities, and is an advisor to the family on how to make it all work and to really understand their needs so that the providers can deliver the right solution at the right price for the family.
Yeah, that's great. So when should I, as I put together my estate plan, when should I be considering a trust company as a part of that estate plan? At what point does it begin to make sense for me to consider doing that?
Yeah, a lot of people start with a revocable trust, which you can change and modify at different times. So I wouldn't. To me, it's a fundamental estate planning is set up when it's not you're not making a mistake in doing that. But obviously, everyone's circumstances and conditions. I think one of the things we see is a lot of times people procrastinate. And during the pandemic, I think people were awakened to their mortality, and that spurred some estate planning activity. But it's a good practice if you don't want to get your information exposed to the public. if you don't want to get exposed to unnecessary tax liability or delays in your family getting distributed the assets they're entitled to as part of your estate and your will, it makes sense to get the professionals to help guide you through that and put that in place, and then do it in such a way that you can build in flexibility to change it as circumstances change throughout your lifetime. But it's not something we recommend that you put off very long. And a lot of the procrastination is because people, it's a mystery. And so we take a lot of pride in working with our advisors to help families simplify and demystify. There's a lot of technical terms and a lot of financial concepts that the average, family may not understand, but that's where we come in. That's our job.
Great. So, say I'm the beneficiary. Go back to just a moment where we can talk about family members or others being involved. Can a beneficiary or a family member or a close friend act as a co-trustee with you all? And if they can, how do you separate the duties of what you do versus whatever that other co-trustee might do?
That's a great question. So everything starts with the instrument. So it's really important that when working with the estate planning attorney who drafts the documents, that the family is a clear sense of what their needs and requirements and desires are, as well as what capacities do they want certain people to perform. Because that's where it all begins for a corporate trustee is we're guided by the instrument and we act in accordance with that. So if that's all in there, there are a lot of different capacities and roles you could assign to people. One is a co-trustee. So those individuals would actually be on equal footing with the corporate trustee. And depending upon the instrument, they could have the ability to approve payments. They could have the ability to oversee the investments. They could have a range of responsibilities. Obviously, recipients of all the information have complete transparency into the trust. But that obviously is a fiduciary role, and that's work and expertise and takes time. So that's not for everybody. But then you have a new role that's emerged in the last, I guess, decade with South Dakota, and that's one of the reasons why we have a trust company in South Dakota, is the role of trust protector. And that's where essentially you can assign someone a non-fiduciary role to hire and fire a lot of the service providers. So that's the person that, will survive the grantor and essentially act in their best interest, because they're typically someone that is very close and they're very knowledgeable with the person that they're serving for. And then there's just agents who you can assign a specific role. And then for larger families, they have committees. So you could have a distribution committee, you can have an investment committee. And all these, the CITES of South Dakota makes a lot of these things a lot easier to implement. It's easier to transform a trust document. If it didn't reflect those things, you can revise the instrument and, enable access to a lot of progressive trust statutes and tax advantages that other CITESs don't necessarily offer.
So even if I live in a state outside of South Dakota, I could still set up the CITES of the trust in South Dakota or have it administered?
That's exactly right. You can specify the legal CITES and the CITES of administration separate from your residence.
Well, in the financial planning profession, and of course I am partial to the Certified Financial Planning designation, having served on the CFP board for 6 years and had the honor and pleasure to be the chair of the CFP board in 2014. What special credentials, if any, trust officers typically have, and more specifically, those at National Advisors Trust?
Yeah, so we operate in a team concept, starting with the trust administration group. Many of them are licensed attorneys. They're graduates with JD and LLM degrees. So they have that pedigree in terms of academic pedigree, but they're not practicing attorneys because we don't actually draft the documents here.
Mm-hmm.
And then the certified trust and fiduciary designation, the CTFA, is a well-respected certification that almost all of our trust officers have. And it requires a minimum of 3 years experience and 7 prior years of some prerequisite education and training, and a series of 3 exams that have to be passed to get the designation. And then you have to continue to get your training and education throughout your career to maintain it. So that's viewed as kind of the gold standard for trust officers. And then here at the trust company, we have certified securities operations professionals. I have that designation. We have certified treasury professionals. We have CPAs. So It's those core finance and accounting and trust certifications and credentials that we look for in hiring our talent.
Yeah. So let's think for a moment. It's not all roses in dealing with a trust when you're an advisor or the family. So what kind of pain points do advisors face when they think about adding trust services to their offering?
Yeah, I think first, unless they came from a bank or a trust company, it's often very unfamiliar to the advisors. So there's some education, and we lead with education here at the trust company. With our 340 firms, some is such a wide degree of levels of experience and expertise. But the other factor that comes into play is typically trust accounts only make up 8 to 12% of total accounts. Even if you have them, oftentimes don't you don't spend a lot of your time. So some of the knowledge and expertise is perishable. But it's held to a different standard, trust accounts, and they have different regulatory and compliance oversight than a normal agency account does. So it's a little bit more labor intensive. It's a lot more knowledge intensive. And then obviously, you have, be responsible to the beneficiaries and the remainderment of the trust, as well as, future generations that may be named in the instrument as well. So it's a very complex and labor intensive account, for most advisors.
So, in thinking about working with a trust company, et cetera, and growth, what are some of the biggest growth and productivity drivers for advisors? And how does all of that align up in both your favor as well as the beneficiaries and the advisor?
That's great. So obviously, advisors for productivity, it's all about having the right team or, around them to provide and maintain the high levels of services and the responsiveness the clients and the families have come to expect over the years. We operate as an extension of your team. And so that's what's so great about our model with most of our advisors, selecting us because we align our trust team with the firm. So there's a level of intimacy and knowledge with your advisors and your families. And then we integrate at the technology level, and we integrate on different levels of the business to make sure that everybody's well informed and can serve the client equally. The other consideration is, for advisors, it really gives them the ability to service a wide range of investors, whether it's mass affluent, high net worth, ultra high net worth, or family offices. Trust always plays a significant role in each of those relationships. So for growth-oriented advisors and firms who've chosen to integrate trust into their solution set, I think it's a great opportunity to do that. The other thing we find is, since this trust brings you more into the advice side of the business versus transactional, this enables for more quality discussions. Families change over the years. So you have to be aware of the family dynamics. Risk tolerance of people changes over the years. You really want to use this to introduce yourselves to second, third generation of the families. Because in many cases, when the spouse passes away, 80% of the time, the surviving spouse looks for another advisor. So you put a lot of time and energy into getting these relationships and nurturing them and guiding them for years. And when it matters most, you're going to want to really have that continuity and keep that relationship and keep the assets that you've served for that family for years.
Jim, what is happening right now that makes this such a great time for advisors and, of course, clients to be discussing estate and trust planning ideas at this particular point?
Yeah, obviously, today, if you're in a high risk profession, anesthesiologist or own a construction firm, trusts are often used, and South Dakota is the best situs to administer trusts to protect assets. Asset and credit protection statutes in South Dakota are the best in the country. Obviously, the wealth transfer, or now people are calling it the wealth transition, that's going to occur of over $80 trillion that many of us have been talking about for a long time, is finally occurring. Trust should play a big role into protecting, preserving that wealth, as well as the legacy that the families want to support. And I think you mentioned earlier, I think people's lives. So making sure you have access to your social media, your family has access to all those things, after your death, are things that can be addressed in your estate planning documents, as well as just having your normal, healthcare and power of attorneys and everything else taken care of.
Jim, a lot of times when we discuss trusts with clients, they say, oh, well, I don't have that much money. It's not a big deal. And I'm talking about people that might have $5, $6, $7 million, and they think that you got to have multi-millions of dollars or $1 billion to really have the trust. One of the things I think really important for advisors to be talking to their clients about is the beauty of when a trust is set up by parents, either while alive or at death, and money is deposited in that on behalf of somebody else, that becomes a protected asset. It's an asset that can't be gotten to, in most cases, by those that might be advertising on TVs relative to representing people because an accident occurred. If the child that's going to inherit or is going to get the money or inherit the money gets divorced, the income out of those trusts might be counted in some way, but the assets are protected, not having to be split if kept separate. Grandchildren, you never know how they're going to grow up and what they're going to turn out to be like. And then, if your son or daughter that you've left the money to dies at a relatively young age, then the surviving spouse remarries. If all the money was given out directly to the son or daughter, then those assets may not end up going to the grandchild or the grandchildren of the grandparents. It's all in the bloodline, which we think is really important, that the families that created the wealth ought to keep the wealth within their own bloodline.
You're exactly right. And that's another place where our trust company is very different from some of the other providers, is that we do perform settlement services. And it's a competency of ours. And, if we're named in a future appointment upon death, we can help the family and the advisor marshal the assets and value the assets and disposition them accordingly. And if a trust is involved, help set up that resulting trust and fund it and put it under administration.
Well, Jim, any last words as we wrap up this edition of the podcast? Anything that we haven't touched on that you want to make sure that advisors and clients know or understand?
No, I think we covered just about everything, Ray. I just would say that you touched upon it, but I'll just reinforce it. There's no time like the present to sit down with your advisor and start the estate planning process. It does take some time and take some preparation from start to finish. And so if you start today, you'll do the best thing for yourself and your extended family. Thanks again for the honor of serving you and the families you serve, Ray.
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you for being on the podcast and giving us a good primer on trust companies and the importance both to the advisory firms as well as to the clients. This has been Jim Combs with National Advisors Trust Company that's been with us. I'm Ray Ferrara. Now I want you to go out there and up your assets.
This has been another edition of the Up Your Assets podcast, hosted by Ray Ferrara, CFP founder and executive chair of Provise Management Group, LLC. The preceding presentation was for general information purposes only and not personalized advice. Seek out a professional before making any financial decisions. Additionally, no guests pay to be on the show or are paid to be on the show. The opinions expressed are their own and not the host's or the show.